Well, good afternoon, guys, or good evening, or good morning, whatever your time zone is. This is Steve with today's Israel update. And before I get into that update, would you indulge me for a second, allow me to opine about something? Over the weekend, I heard a couple pastors, people that I decided to peekaboo on the internet to see what they're saying in their services, pray this prayer for, peace in the Holy Land. And you know what? That bothered me because Holy Land is almost never used in the Bible to describe the land of Israel. Israel, on the other hand, is used over 2,500 times in the Bible. Only once in the Bible does that term Holy Land ever appear, and that's Zechariah chapter 2, I think verse 16. So if you're a pastor, well, the first thing I'd like to say to you is at least try to get the biblical nomenclature right. God calls the land in the Bible the land of Israel. Holy Land is a feckless way of giving in to the pressure of the wokeism of the time to not enter into the fray that will be caused when you say that the Bible positively and unconditionally gives the land of Israel to the Jewish people forever. There's no such thing as Palestine in the Bible, and guess what? There's never been a Palestine in history. There's never been a country called Palestine. If there was, and I ask you, what was the date of its founding? Who was its first leader, its first president, its first king? What was its capital city? You won't be able to answer any of the above questions in the affirmative because guess what? There never was such a country called Palestine. In the whole history of that land, there's only been independent Jewish sovereignties, for lack of a better word, states, the ancient kingdom of Israel, the ancient kingdom of Judah, and the modern day state of Israel. And between those Jewish sovereignties, the region basically shuffled back and forth as a backwater district within much larger empires, be it the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And therefore, folks, pastors especially, don't shy away from this topic, which is taken up by more verses of the Bible than any other subject in the Bible. Did you know that? The subject of Israel takes up the entirety almost of the Bible. And therefore, you can't just pretend that elephant is in a room, the proverbial elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Guess what? All the Bible talks about for about 5/6 of the Bible, 4/6, 5/6 of the Bible is Israel, whether people like it or not. God's covenantal relationship with Israel, past, present, and future. So don't give in to the pressure. Take a stand, just like you take a stand on any other issue that you consider biblical. This is the granddaddy of all biblical issues. If you relate to the gravity of an issue based on how many verses deal with it, guess what? You're going to find very hard to find a subject that surpasses Israel in the amount of scripture that handles the issue. So thank you for indulging me on this first couple minutes where I just opine and give into my passions. But look, what I just said is true, and I expect pastors to take the truthful line on the issue of the land of Israel, to whom it was given and by whom it was given. And if you don't believe that part of the Bible, then guess what? You won't understand one thing that's happening in our world today. Now that's behind me, what's going on today? Well, Israel's ground incursion has not begun yet. Now, you may have heard in certain echo chambers and circles that this is because the Biden administration, has stabbed Israel in the back, is restraining it. How true is that assertion? Well, it's definitely not a stab in the back. So that part, folks, whoever you listen to in the weekend that throws out that red meat, to get people's passions stirred, nobody in Israel feels that the country's been stabbed in the back. Since the beginning of the war 2 weeks ago, with the carnage of October 7th, America has done almost everything right. The President of the United States has unconditionally supported Israel in word as well as almost as well as in deed, and I'll elaborate more on that in just a moment. President Biden gave one of the most pro-Israel and pro-Jewish speeches on the day or the day after all this carnage happened, and he has since made other speeches. He has visited Israel in a time of war, being the only American president to ever do so. He has sent 2 battle carrier groups into the theater there to help reinforce Israel's own forces, and as a deterrent to Iran and Iran's proxies to further get involved. Are there things that I disagree with that President Biden has done concerning the conflict? Absolutely, 2 in particular. I feel that he's been overly into the whole thing about the humanitarian aid, this insistence that a lot of humanitarian aid go into Gaza. The Israeli point of view on the issue is that Hamas has 200, or had, we'll talk about that in just a minute, 203 hostages, and as long as they have Israeli citizens, why should Israel feel the least bit irresponsible to take care of Hamas's citizens? If you're going to kidnap citizens of Israel after raping and pillaging them, then don't expect Israel to just be full of charity towards your own citizens. And if you want to give your people food and water, release Israel's citizens. It's that simple. Unfortunately, President Biden doesn't agree with that strategy, and he's insisted that Israel open the way from the via the border with Egypt, which is called the Rafah border, I think, and allow convoys of trucks every day to deliver food, water, medicine. All that sounds good and dandy. But what's the problem with all that? That it's likely will end up in Hamas's hands, not the citizens' hands. And Israel wants to make Hamas, or let's say, starve and thirst them out of action. In other words, why provide them energy, food? And the worry, of course, is that in lieu of the fluids, water being brought into Gaza, that some of these trucks will be carrying fuel, and the fuel is necessary. Excuse me, this grandmother clock here is chiming on the side, and I don't want to do another take of this video. This happened to me, by the way, last week. I'm doing a great video, in my opinion, and suddenly, boom, grandmother clock here chimes. Again, I have to do then a second take, then something else happens, and then I had to do a third take. And I've decided I'm only going to do 1 take, regardless if this clock to the side of me here chimes. It did, thank God, only briefly. So there's nothing wrong in principle with wanting to help the Gazan, everyday Gazan citizens. The problem is we know that some of that will be siphoned off by Hamas, and Hamas needs that fuel to run the electricity in their tunnels. I've read in some places, well, Israel was supplying electricity, and it uses electricity until Israel cut it off. It needed some of that electricity to launch its rockets at Israel. Okay, so obviously Israel doesn't want to provide the Gaza Strip with anything that can be re-resourced to Hamas's own hands. So that's one of the things that I personally haven't cared for, in terms of the Biden approach to war. And the second thing that I wanted to relate to, but of course it's only in the realm of rumor right now, is the allegation that America's tied Israel hands from preemptively striking Hezbollah. Okay, the New York Times came out with a great article a few days ago, and I think I may even have appended it to my last video. If not, it was mentioned in a podcast that I appended to my last video, which said that the triumvirate that runs Israel of Netanyahu, Gantz, and Yoav Gallant, it was presented to them the option of preemptively attacking Hezbollah at the time of Israel's own choosing. And Netanyahu was against it. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, was for it. The third guy I mentioned, Benny Gantz, was the tiebreaker, and evidently he sided with Netanyahu on this one. And the belief is that the two of them felt that America was putting pressure on them to not open up a second front, that it's not in what America perceives to be in its interest if Hezbollah gets involved, and then Iran gets involved, and then the Iranian proxies in Syria get involved, because then American forces, particularly in Iraq and Syria, become vulnerable to attack. Now, they've already been attacked, which is one of the reasons why the Defense Department is sending a second battle group, okay, or aircraft carrier, not to the Eastern Mediterranean as believed previously. That already has the Gerald Ford in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's the largest aircraft carrier in America's Navy. A second aircraft carrier battle group called the Eisenhower, that's being sent to the region of the Persian Gulf, a little bit closer to Iran and to Iraq, to be there to launch a response should Iran get a little too aggressive in aiming its proxies at American forces, as it already has. Now, none of us want to see the United States get dragged into another Middle East war, and I really hope that it doesn't. But you can't fault the Biden administration for taking the time to put the assets out there to defend American interests, which is one of the reasons why the Biden administration has restrained Israel, or at least asked them, don't start the ground campaign until we, the Americans, have all of our assets in place to respond accordingly if American assets are attacked. That's one of the reasons why the United States has asked Israel to restrain itself. And also, Israel doesn't lose anything by the ground campaign not starting it. It has more time to rehearse it, more time to practice it. Remember that something like 80% of Israel's military are reserves, not people that serve full-time in the army. These people are accountants, teachers, truck drivers, tour guides that used to be in the regular army, as I was, okay, the regular Israeli army, afterwards moved to reserve duty. Now, reserve duty, when I did it, consisted of anywhere between 2 weeks and a month of service a year. And when you show up with all your friends from your unit to do reserve, look, some of these guys have become obese over the last year. They're out of training in every way, out of condition. They have to be reacquainted with their guns. They have to be issued the right equipment. There's real reasons to slow down the incursion, or let's say the introduction of Israeli forces. And in my opinion, each day that this thing is delayed, it actually plays in to Israel's hands and advantage. The troops get better training in the meanwhile. They get better equipment in the meanwhile. I told you about the 50,000 bulletproof vests that Israel had a shortage of that are now being distributed to the forces there. It allows it to gather more intelligence. It allows it to fly more Air Force sorties to bomb areas within the Gaza Strip that will now open the way and make it easier and less dangerous for the Israeli ground forces once they go there. For instance, they're knocking down tall buildings that can serve as sniper nests for Hamas. They're trying to take out the entrances and exits of tunnel networks. They're trying to do away with positions that can be used to fire anti-tank weapons. So don't think that just because the ground incursion hasn't happened yet, that the brakes have been applied to the war effort. Not at all. In fact, I heard on the Israeli media earlier today that last night saw the greatest amount of bombing of Gaza since this war began 2 weeks ago. So, is President Biden and the United States, have they asked Israel to slow down their entering into the Gaza Strip on the ground? The answer is yes, but not for nefarious reasons, not because the Biden administration is stabbing Israel in the back. And I just want to caution all of you that listen to this, be careful of the echo chamber and just feeding you the things that they know will cause you to emote and get angry. That's how cable news makes their money, by keeping people in a constant state of anger and feeling aggrieved. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything Joe Biden does or his administration does, either in general or in the Israel issue in particular. But you know what? For the most part, he's done a really good job. And where there's disagreement, it's not critical. These aren't the most critical issues. The Americans have provided Israel so much since this wars began, things probably that we don't know about. And all that they've asked for is this humanitarian aid to go into Gaza and for Israel to slow down the entrance or the initiation of its ground forces into the theater of war so that America can get its own assets into place to be ready to respond should American forces come under attack. Lastly, we can't forget about the hostages. Okay, today on the Israeli media, it was mentioned that there were up to 50 hostages who may be released owing to ongoing negotiations between Qatar, which is acting on behalf of the American interest here, and Hamas. And just as I was about to make this video, lo and behold, I hear of two more hostages in addition to the two that were released last week being released today. Okay, so we should care, okay, that these people are released, that these hostages, if they have a chance to come home, they should be given every opportunity to get out of there before it becomes impossible. Because in my opinion, once that ground war begins, it's highly unlikely that we'll ever see one of these hostages that are still being held alive again. So if delaying things for a few days or a week or whatever can bring more hostages home, save their lives, and I'm all for it. I have no problem with it. And if Iran and Hezbollah and Syria and all these people interpret that as Israeli weakness, well, then they're about to stumble into a rude awakening that it's not because of Israeli weakness, but it's thankfully due to strategizing, okay, and not jumping into things with testosterone, but with brains. Anyway, thanks for deciding to spend the last few minutes with me, and I appreciate your time. This is Steve, the tour guide, signing off, having just completed today's Israel update. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and I'll be back with you again, likely tomorrow. Bye-bye.